Sherpa, who is an assistant professor and a research scholar at Mirik College in Raiganj University. So Nimu Sherpa will be talking about recentering exile, post-memorial resistance from Darjeeling. Please go ahead.
It will be better, no? Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Is it working? Okay. This is, we can keep like this. A very warm good afternoon to one and all present here. I would like to start with the permission of the chair. But for and foremost, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers and the team of Tibetan Policy Institute for giving us this privilege to present our papers in this esteemed conference. My paper is titled Recentering Exile, Post-Memory and Resistance from Darjeeling. The study of Tibetan diaspora has garnered considerable scholarly attention, particularly since 1990s, when researchers, academicians, and scholars started looking at the political, cultural, and spiritual dimension of exile following 1959 Tibetan uprising and the subsequent exodus to India, Nepal, and beyond. However, much of this scholarship understandably centered on Dharamshala, which is widely regarded as a symbolic heart and the epicenter of Tibetan exile community, profoundly shaped by the presence of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and the seat for the Central Tibetan administration, and such facts naturally garners global attention. However, today I dare to deviate a little from the norm and to step outside the hegemonic structure to trace the history of Tibetan diaspora beyond Dharamshala. Because, although this focus on Dharamshala is significant, but it has resulted in the marginalization of other equally essential Tibetan settlements, such as in Darjeeling. Therefore, I propose a recentering of Darjeeling within the historical geography of Tibetan exile, not to pose challenge, but to bring into visibility a lesser-known historical sites within the broader tapestry of Tibetan exile history. To maintain the study's precision, I propose providing a case study of Tibetan refugees living within Darjeeling town, and I believe this study will contribute to a more nuanced understanding of exile identity, one that is not shaped by political exile, but also through the cultural memory and the human memory, thereby broadening the notion of Tibetan exile history. So far, the methodology of my study is concerned, I have primarily based it on participant observation and a semi-structured interview. I have interviewed 8 individuals across different age groups ranging from 26 to 80, which encompass diverse area and perspectives. I have also referred to secondary and primary data. This paper is informed by both the academic inquiry and my positionality as a native from Darjeeling, which enables me with unique insider-outsider perspective to examine the lived experiences of Tibetan refugees in exile in Darjeeling. The 2 research questions animates the study. Number 1, how Darjeeling historically functioned as a nexus between Tibet and Indian subcontinent, and number 2, in what ways do oral archives and intergenerational memory sustains Tibetan identity in Darjeeling. Darjeeling and its surrounding area served as a crucial contact zone. That is what we have been talking about all this while. So my first proposition here dates back to 1910, when His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama, Thupten Gyatso, was exiled in Darjeeling in a place called Hillside in Lebong between 1910 to 12, due to the Qing militancy caused by Chinese aggression against Tibet at that time. The original house, however, has long been collapsed, leaving nothing except the foundation, which is now the exact location where the Tibetan Refugee Self-Help Center is located. And this perhaps is the first Tibetan refugee self-help center ever established in Exile in 1st October 1959 itself. The validity of Dalai Lama's stay in Hillside can be traced from different travel logs, memos, and books written during that time, but I would like to drag your attention to E.C. Doze's record from his book, A Conscience History of Darjeeling from 1835, where he says, and I quote, "He does not like going out in the streets in Lhasa." He here means His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama. As his presence draws the crowds in Darjeeling, he used to take regular exercise and might sometimes be met on the paths in Birch Hill Forest, accompanied by a single servant. To the Europeans and Indians in Darjeeling, he was almost unknown, unquote. Darjeeling's connection to Tibet, here I say predates 1959 exile, as the name itself, Darjeeling, which was derived from the monastery constructed in the hills of Mahakal Dara, Darjeeling, by a Tibetan Lama named Dorje Lingpa, and it translates to the place of thunderbolts. An eminent writer named Raj Bahadur Rai in Darjeeling from Mirik, and he writes a book in milieu of Rangduti Garden, where he writes, and I quote, "Darjeeling is named after Dorje Lingpa, who had built a monastery called Dorchung Gumpa. However, in 1780, the Gorkha soldiers demolished the monastery but built a temple in the place. The same monastery later relocated in 1818 to Bhutia Basti, which again destroyed in the massive earthquake of 15 January 1934, unquote. Now I would like to move towards the trade routes, because Darjeeling, situated in the crossroads of Himalayas, particularly Darjeeling, historically thrived as a hub for Indo-Tibetan trade. Caravans carrying wool and salt on horses from Tibet descend through Nathula and Jalipla passes in Kalimpong and Darjeeling, where they exchange goods such as wool, yak products, salt, medicinal herbs, incenses, and religious artifacts for Indian textile, tea, spices, and British manufactured items. In this regard, a prominent historian, Jahar Sen, in his book Darjeeling, a Faber Retreat, writes, I quote, "The imports consist of salt, gold, silver, precious stones, and coarse woolen stuff. The principal imports was wool. The flocks of Tibet were very numerous, and the wool is of the finest quality," unquote. Later, a lot of refugees who took refuge to the Himalayan towns of Darjeeling and Kalimpong has been said, like they have taken this similar route to escape or to come into exile through the Lhasa, Fari, Jalipla, Kalimpong road during exile. Yeah. In this regard, T.B. Subba writes in his Flight and Adaptation, and I quote, "A large group of refugees, particularly those who settled in Darjeeling and Sikkim Himalayas before 1959 and after, took the route which starts at Fari, crosses the Chumbi Lake, enters Sikkim through Jalipla Pass, and connects Kalimpong via northeastern Sikkim," unquote. Similarly, the spiritual ties between Tibet and Darjeeling is equally significant. Monasteries become a site of trans-Himalayan Buddhist transmission, hosting lamas trained in Tibet and Nepal. Several reincarnate lamas found refuge in Darjeeling following Chinese incursion in Tibet, transforming the region into a sacred landscape that preserved continuity of Tibetan Buddhism. And this preservation also served as a refuge for age-old culture and religious practices of Tibetan Buddhism, now commonly referred to as Himalayan Buddhism. Darjeeling has the prominent monasteries from 4 different sects of Tibetan Buddhism, namely Nyingmapa, Kagyupa, Sakyupa, and Gelugpa. Here I have tried to put up a few pictures from the monasteries from different traditions from Tibetan Buddhism. And however, this monastic tradition is not just limited to Darjeeling. They have branches of all these sects spread across different parts in Darjeeling. So the presence of Tibetan settlers, merchants, monks was evident in Darjeeling, but it was particularly felt to be more pronounced after exile in 1960. Initially, after exile, the Tibetans were scattered in three significant locations in Darjeeling, namely Darjeeling town itself, Lama Hata, and Pokriabung. One separate settlement was also established in 1965 at Sonada, which initially accommodated 277 people. The initial population that was recorded in Darjeeling of Tibetan refugees somewhere around early 1960s was 602. But the report from the Tibetan Refugee Self-Help Office, the settlement office, it says now they have 1,457 people living in and around Darjeeling, whereas the largest population is still concentrated in Darjeeling town itself. So this initial settlement was basically formalized under the formation of kidus within Darjeeling town, and these kidus many of them are 100 years old, which were formed in Darjeeling before exile. Initially, kidus were formed by the first Tibetans who migrated to Darjeeling during British colonial era. Here, one of my respondents, Mr. Chiringdoji Bhutia, who is now 80 years old, says, and I quote, "They were known as Ningzor, which translates to those who came before 1959. They were essentially rickshaw pullers gathered below the Mount Everest Hotel, the first hotel in Darjeeling, which is now known as Bellevue Hotel, sometimes around 1945. Unquote. So these kidus were later mobilized mainly by the employment opportunities offered by British residents. They met the labor needs by British sahibs who frequented Darjeeling to escape the scorching heat of the plains. The kidus ensured the mobility of British people in the hilly terrain of Darjeeling, which was overseen by a Sardar, which was responsible for the specific area in Darjeeling. But after the Tibetan exodus, the kidus were more structured and formalized and named as Kidu Chu, also known as Das Kidu or Tien Kidu. So the Das Kidu or a Kidu Chu is an apex body under which there are further classification of these 9 other kidus. If you'll see the names of the kidus, they were more area specific, but I would like to drag your attention to a specific name like Nangsegang Kidu. Nangsegang Kidu, as my respondent would say, is not actually a Tibetan term, but it happened to be a kind of the colonial hangover that still lingers in the Kidu, because as I've said that they were area specific. During the British colonial era, the Babus and the Mem Sahib would like to frequent to the place called Gymkhana, which was very popular for merrymaking, singing, and dancing. And then Nangsegang Kidu happened to be a rough translation of Nepali word Nach Gan Kidu. So that is how even the oral narratives now is saved in a form in exile. So Tibetans who migrated to Darjeeling after 1959 exodus were basically known as Sarjor or Jejor, who came after 1959. Now, these kidus has been more pertinent to establish a cultural ties in exile. As after exile, the people or the refugees become more apprehensive about cultural amnesia, so much so the elderly fear dying in a foreign land without proper burial ritual. So they started ghettoizing, and the kidus were formed where it also associated them with the hope that there will be a kind of a cultural stability for themselves. So now, till here, I have talked about the pre-exilic ties of Darjeeling and Tibet. Now, I would like to move forward to the second portion of my paper, that is the post-memory, which has been talked like in an elaborate way by Dr. Patik Roy already. So, but I would just like to reiterate on certain facts. Where the Tibetan community in Darjeeling is fueled not by the direct memory, but the memory or that is the post-memory. The paper primarily relies on Mariana Hassey's concept of post-memory, which refers to a transmission of traumatic memories across generations. For Tibetans in exile in Darjeeling, post-memory sustains as a cultural identity among younger generation who are descendants of trauma, who survive, who inherit collective memories of their parents and their grandparents. Hers has also defined that it's a relationship that after generation or generation after bears by a cultural, personal, collective trauma of those who came before. So here I would like to put forward the examination of some of the lived experience of the second and the third generation Tibetan refugees from Darjeeling. And I believe that this will be a more nuanced geography of exile which can be articulated through these interviews and how we can acknowledge the quiet, persistent ways of community which sustains itself in a form of homeland through post-memory. 27-year-old Rinchen Bhutia assists her father, who is 66-year-old, named Sonam Tempa Bhutia, in running a small business setup where they sell Tibetan items including bhale, khapse, zero, and samba. Many of these items were made at home. After completing her bachelor's degree, she is often seen in a town standing beside her shop. She has recently enrolled herself for a paramedical course at Siliguri. In her absence, her father has been standing beside their small business setup. I'm especially fascinated by the resilience and the composure of a young girl. She doesn't hesitate to run the shop as other Tibetan youngsters that we get to see in Darjeeling. And she takes up the responsibility towards her parents and family. When asked, she would proudly say, I quote, "This is what our Pala and Amla were doing, and it is a way for her to connect to her roots." When asked about Tibet, she would say, "I have never seen Tibet, but Tibet is always there in my memory, in my songs, in butter lamps, in the way my grandmother told me stories." Similarly, a 45-year-old woman named Yangchin Bhutia runs a Tibetan eatery named Amdo Chone Tibetan Restaurant, which is the only Tibetan restaurant in Darjeeling. Established in 2014, the restaurant is a go-to place for people who find Tibetan food. They primarily serve momo and laughing. She says that she is an orphan and she does not have a very sharp memory of coming to exile, but she remembers growing up in the Tibetan Refugee Self-Help Center, and she has also worked in Tibetan carpet factory, the carpet factory in the center for quite some time. But after her marriage with Nima Chiring Bhutia, who is now 60 years old from Dharamshala, they have started the Tibetan eatery in Darjeeling, showcasing the indomitable post-memorial ties, because they see is the naming of the restaurant is after the village that they belong to in Amdo province in Tibet called Chone. So the name holds a great connection to their homeland, and Tibet endures even in exile for them. Likewise, I had a heartwarming conversation with Tenzing Bhutia, who runs a Tenzing gym in Darjeeling, which is quite a famous gym there. Tenzing La shares the stories of of the parents who passed long past now. They used to narrate the stories about their exile and how they migrated through the Bhutan road. Facing utter poverty upon reaching to Darjeeling, their parents initially started working as a menial laborers in road construction and tea garden and raised their children, which speaks a volume about their resilience. Tenzing La is today a well-known personality and a member of different Tibetan organizations in Darjeeling, and he says, I quote, "Every Tibetan family has his own unique story to be told. Within his own family, his mother has a story of coming to exile at the age of 14, and his father arrived when he was 12 years old, through a different route, facing different struggle with different stories." He further tells that his father was just too old, but the father used to tell the stories that how the snow was eating his feet. And when he told his stories, it was not just the pain that he was telling, but he was reiterating on the strength and resilience that they carry with themselves. So Tenzing La would say that, however, he had not been to Tibet so far, but for him, Tibet is one of the most beautiful places, and this is the place where his dreams and his memories still survive. So the identity here of these respondents become a complex space of negotiation between the inherited memory of Tibet and the lived reality in Darjeeling. This duality sometimes manifests as a tension between the duty to preserve the past and a desire to forge a future in the present. The first generation Tibetans recount the treacherous journey across the Himalayas, while younger generation narrates the challenges growing up in between Tibetan and Nepali identities. It emphasized the denial of avoiding a romanticized portrayal of exile, instead focuses on a dynamic and often changing process of identity formation in exile. However, after 66 years of exile, marking in the year 2025, the need to naturalize themselves in the Indian soil has also been realized. A 65-year-old Tenzing Dorje, who runs a Tibetan shop, the shop with Tibetan items, now holds an Indian citizenship, which suggests his assimilation in the host nation. Furthermore, he does not have any distinct memory of Tibet, and he has lost his parents when he was a toddler, which says that he does not have a sharp memory. When asked about the photographs of his parents or the memorial ties to Tibet, he would resent, and he would say that keeping the photographs of dead people is not in our ritual. But after half an hour conversation, he too confessed that he longs for Tibet and dreams of going to Tibet once in his lifetime. So, assimilation, however, is inevitable. Tibetan youths in Darjeeling identify themselves more with Bollywood culture and a K-pop culture more than the classical Tibetan operas, and intermarriages with Nepali and Lepcha community is increasingly common. While some elders fear this cultural assimilation and dilution, but where the others see as a mode of assimilation and survival in exile. However, post-memory ensures that even assimilated identities retain fragments of Tibet, which is articulated, reinvigorated, and made up in a new cultural expression now and then. So the refugee generally adapt to the atmosphere of host nation. It is what T.B. Subba says, and he says that it's also because the assimilation is also because, I quote, "We do not remember what we do not know, because remembering is something we do in a form of symbol, colors, taste, words, smell, etc. These are the part of our knowing," unquote. And many of the Tibetans born soon after 1960s are the part of generation who remembers Tibet, not from their own memories, but from the stories of Tibet by their parents and grandparents. However, we cannot say that post-memorial ties of Tibetans in Darjeeling is weaker than the direct memory. Rather, it is a creative, fluid, and an active process. It compels the youth to remember a life they never lived and still a sense of responsibility to preserve the culture, language, and identity that their elders carried across the Himalayas. Okay, so with the post-memorial ties, it has also been realized that the preservation of cultural identity is a form of resilience against the national and political displacement of Tibetans. Since their re-establishment in exile, they have tried to safeguard their cultural identity in an effort to preserve their national identity as Tibetans. The Tibetan refugees in Darjeeling, as the Tibetan refugees anywhere across the world, try to reaffirm their cultural identity through attire, music, festival, art, and architecture, which enables them to connect to their imagined homeland. Here I would like to play the two videos. One is during the occasion of a Lakhar, where I cannot play it. So sorry. I need to skip. It's not been played. Those are the videos. Can I play it? It's okay. Okay, so one video is of the Tibetan women who were gathered in Chaurasta, a very famous place, and they were dancing and trying to gather the attention of the tourists who are also dancing with them. The other one is in the Department of Tibetology in Darjeeling Government College, where the students were singing Tibetan song, which is a form of reiteration. So, Deepika Chhetri, in her doctoral thesis, writes, even after 65 years of political and cultural displacement, as marked in 2025, they have managed to keep their cultural faith alive. They continue to assert it over in front of global communities, making the world aware about their existence. So now I would like to conclude with that. So by shifting this focus from Dharamshala to Darjeeling, this paper shed light tries to shed light on the vital yet under-researched chapter of Tibetan diaspora, Darjeeling's role is frequently relegated to the historical footnote, a temporary sanctuary, or a transit point. However, the Darjeeling Hills cannot be just a peripheral outpost, but it's a foundational site where the story of Tibetan exile has been unfolding since generation. The paper aims to present a pluralistic and a geographically sensitive understanding of diaspora, acknowledging that the spirit of nation can be powerfully preserved in small, everyday act of dispersed people. Darjeeling thus emerges as an exilic space where Tibet is simultaneously absent and profoundly present. Thank you very much.
Cartographies of loss, mapping the forgotten Tibet to exile monasteries in Tibet.
A very good afternoon to one and all present over here. I am Ms. Sudipa Lama from Mirik. I happen to be Ms. Nimu's colleague, and along with me, I have Sir Subayu Bhattacharya from Mirik College, who is the co-author of my paper. So for this, I am, and in fact, I shouldn't say I, so I'll say we. So we are very thankful to the TPI for giving us this opportunity to present a paper here. So this study emerges from a deeper understanding how religion, culture, and memory together construct a homeland that no longer exists on a political map, yet continues to live, breathe, and evolve through sacred spaces like monasteries in exile. Hence, the title of our paper is Cartography of Laws, Mapping Tibet Through Exile Monasteries. When going with the abstract, I'd like to start with the border and frontiers, which bears political importance. It defines a nation's identity, integrity, and sovereignty. But what happens when a border is erased? When a country disappears from the world map? Such is the story of Tibet. So, when we talk about the losing of the map, losing of the border, the Tibetan people, they came to India. So when they came to India, they have developed a diaspora, which is clearly visible. As Ms. just she told about the diaspora in Darjeeling, we have seen in Dharamshala. The same way we can see it in Orissa, we can see it in Sarugaram, Siliguri, and there are many more places. And the most important, the focus of our paper, since is the monastery, so I will be talking about the diaspora of Balikupa, most probably the monastic institution called Namdroling. So when we talk about, again, identity is very much important. And to this, we can find that nationality is defined by identity, or you can find it's the vice versa. But here we can find the refugees, they lose their recognition. So hence, I have a picture over here. If you can see, there is a ship where there are lots of people in the sea. Okay, that is actually the picture that was painted by an Italian artist and social worker whose name is Francisco Povecchi. And it actually depicts the ocean actually, which is full of barbed wire, it actually shows the difficulties, the pain, the suffering of the people who are migrating or the people who are refugees. So here you can find that the people who are in the ship, they are the refugees, and the sea, the ocean which is full of barbed wire, they are like, those are the, what we say is the pain, sufferings of those people. Hence, when we talk about refugees, according to UNHCR, the definition of refugees are people forced to flee their own country and seek safety in another country. They are unable to return to their own country because of feared persecution as a result of who they are, what they believe in or say, or because of armed conflict, violence, or serious public disorder. So hence we can find the Tibetans here. India has host 2.5 lakh refugees, and among them the number of Tibetans are actually 72,312 according to the Ministry of Home Affairs 22 to 21. So when we go with the Tibet's political history, we can find the Chinese occupation, which started with the fall of the Qing dynasty in the year 1911, then going on to 17-point agreement in the year 1951, which actually took away the autonomy of Tibet, and His Holiness Dalai Lamas are coming to India. And hence we can find that Tibet is actually surviving in the collective memory. So now what happened to the Tibetans then when they came to, India? Then there is another story of the settlement. So first, when I was going with the reviews and all, the literature review, that time I found a scholar whose name is Robin Brentano, and he has written about Baksa Chogar saving Tibetan Buddhism in exile, where he has written about the first settlement to be the Baksa Chogar in the state West Bengal. So here in the picture we can find there are the monks and the monks who are indulged with their own duties and tradition which they are fulfilling. Even when they came to Baksa Chogar, these did not stop them to stop with the religious activities what they were doing or the traditions that they were living in Tibet. Because here, when I went through the paper again, I just found that the Tibetans, the monks especially, even the lay people, they helped the monks to construct an altar which was made up of bamboo. And even the Sangha's statues, the god statues, were made up of mud and water which was available at that time. So even these things, it did not stop them to continue with the practice of the culture, their religion. Then I come to the main crux of our paper, that is Namroling Monastery, which was founded in the year 1963 by His Holiness 3rd Drubwang Pema Norbu Rinpoche, and whose name was given by 14th Dalai Lama himself. And this monastery is constructed in Balekupa, which is in fact the largest Tibetan settlement. And it, as we have the saying of people that wherever the Tibetans are present, it is referred to as Little Tibet. So here Balekupa is also not an exception. So here we can find even Balekupa is also known as a Little Tibet. Now I come to the problem statement, that is very much limited scholarship we found to just go through, where we can find Namdroling as a preserver of Tibetan culture and Indo-Tibetan, which just gives us the idea of the Indo-Tibetan relationship. And also we come to the research question that how does Namdroling preserves religion and culture? How did His Holiness Penor Rinpoche develop Balekupa? How does it strengthen the Himalaya Buddhist connection? Then we come to the objectives, that is exploring Namdroling history and importance, analyzing Indo-Tibetan relationship, understanding Namdroling as a cartography of forgotten Tibet. So I'm just keeping the significance as it has the same kind of lines over there. So now I come to, justify the questions, or I'm just taking these pictures to tell that how Penor Rinpoche, he came and then he constructed the monastery in Balikupa. When again, I'm skipping to some other pages. I'll come to it later. Since I have come with the topic, so I will be speaking about it as well. So here, I would like to say that when we were doing with the methodology, I just went to interview one of the Lama, who is actually from Namdroling. So he had come to Mirik, so I got an opportunity to go and meet him and talk with him regarding the construction and the preservation of the monastery. And that time he told me that when Drubong Penor Rinpoche, he came to India, that time he came through Arunachal Pradesh, then to Assam, then he came to Dharamshala. Then he came to Balikupa. And it was that when there was a settlement of the Boxa Chogar, that time, even though the Tibetans, they came and they settled over there, it did not stop, as I already said, to continue with the religion, to continue with the tradition. So I want to just point it out here. Boxa Chogar was a different place for them. They belong to the colder region, Boxa Chogar, which is known as Duas now. It is very hot and humid. So they could not, tolerate the heat over there. And they were falling sick. The monks, they were falling sick because of the, heat over there. And not only this, yesterday, one of the speaker also talked about the biting of the snake. So all these things were going on in Boxa Chogar, which led His Holiness Dalai Lama to come in negotiation and talk with Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister, and get an access to Dharamshala. So this was the time when Penor Rinpoche, he just went to the south and he settled in Karnataka, and he also developed the places at Balikupa. So here we can find Penor Rinpoche himself, who is clearing the land, tilling the land, and he himself is over there working as a laborer to construct the monastery. And along with him, we can find in many of the papers, and even Sonam Gongche, who was my primary source. So he also told me that Penor Rinpoche would have, he would call the people when they were sleeping and all, and then he would ask them to work in the field. And when these people used to come and they work in the field, he used to go and do his meditation. So these were the things that was provided in primary data. And as I am speaking about how it is preserving the Tibetan culture, Tibetan tradition, so here we can find over there we can find the dance that is still practiced in Namdroling, that is the charm dance. And down there below we can find the Tibet, the practice of Tibet that goes in each and every monastic institution. So here we can find down there the art of Tibet being practiced. And this art of Tibet was practiced also when they were living in Boxa Chogar. So they were actually the four, all the sects coming together, Nyingmapas, Gelugpas, all the four sects, Shakapas, they were coming together, Kagyurs, they were coming together and they were sitting. Although the settlement was very small for them, still it did not stop this. So when the Kagyurs, they used to practice, the three sects used to sit and they used to observe them. So this was how they first settled, and this is how they carried their tradition, their legacy to Namdroling, and which is being practiced and is being continued even today. Because to tell you, the another primary source for me was Khenpo Dzogchen Moktan, who has actually established a Palyul monastery, a meditation center in Mirik. And he also gave me an insight, why, these things are very much important. When I asked him, how are the ways over there? Do they practice all those things the way back in Tibet? And he was there telling, yes, we practice a lot. And not only this, he also told me about the Ter, the written prayer forms and all, which was destroyed when they were coming. And it was Penor Rinpoche who wrote all the Ter that time, and which is the prayers which are practiced in Namdroling. Then the inside, which reflects the Tibetan art and architecture. This is just the inside of Namdroling. Here we can find the 3 statues over there, which is primary or gods and or gods. And then we can find the mural, which is, the practice of the painting of murals inside the Palil Namdroling monastery. So here we can find that the mass dance that is performed, most probably in Chechu, because when we talk about the preservation, we preserve not only the monastery is not only preserving not only preserving the religion, but everything that comes under religion. Like when we talk about Chechu, the 10th day before the full moon, which is fully observed over there in the Namdroling monastery. And this strikes the most significant and most important items that we can find over there, celebrating and observing Chechu, observing Losar. So all these are observed over there. And when we come to the, when we talk about I should talk about the dress also. I think today I'm wearing chupa, that is baku, and this is also the traditional dress. So the clothing material might be different. When they were in Tibet, they were wearing the woolen ones, which we still find today. Some people living on the high Himalayas wearing those. But even these also did not stop. The materials might have changed, but the dress has not been changed. And even when we talk about the foods and all, when I was interviewing with Khenpo Dzogchen, he told me that, what do you prefer eating in the morning and at night for the dinner? He told me that, I prefer chamba. So, chamba we say. So, he is most to these kind of foods only, which also I think the monastery has, they have learned from the monastery to preserve the food as well. So with the literature review, I have done, we have a lot of literature review, but I have only chosen few over here. So the first would be Tenzing Shunduz, where he has written about refugee, the poetry in Kora, and where he has talked about loss and identity, where he expresses his emotional and physical displacement, and where he tells that RH aged on the forehead, which is actually the mark for the lifelong exile. And he has talked about, he speaks Hindi, English, and Tibetan, which reflects the cultural hybridity. But this cultural hybridity is reflected in the salad bowl theory, because we can find that even though, they have lost the homeland, they have lost everything, still they are able to keep their identity intact. We feel that they have kept the identity intact with their language, with their culture, with their tradition. So they have been preserving uniqueness in assimilation. So here we can find Tenzing Sunde, who is the writer and activist. We have his contents, and I have just taken the poetry refugee. Then we have taken Franz Michael, Survival of Culture, Tibetans' Adaptability and Resilience in India, where he talks about natural home for Buddhist refugees, and where he talks about cultural survival, which is equal to hope and continuity. Then we have L.T. Om Prakash, who has worked a lot about Balekupa and Tibetan refugees, where he talked about the religion to be the central for the Tibetans, and even though they came and then they settled over there, they did not change their religion, they were sticking with the Buddhism. And here, down there, is the picture of the settlement of, Baksa Dor or Baksa Chogar. That is the settlement, the first settlement that the Tibetans, they came and then they settled. So, then we come to the methodology. I was only able to just keep those two photos. On the left-hand side, we can find there is Lopin Sonam Gyamcho, who is from Arunachal Pradesh, who is a monk in the Namdroling monastery, and who is basically my primary source, who has given me the whole of Namdroling and who has given me the whole idea how Penor Rinpoche, he has helped to establish the Indo-Tibetan relationship. And to here, I would be very much precise in telling, I'm not talking about the macro relationship, but I'm talking about the micro relationship, because he was the one who constructed the Tashi Shamba, Tansi Bridge in Balekupa, which actually connects the locals, the non-Tibetans with the with the non-Tibetans, with the Tibetans. So the Tashi Chamba bridge is very much important. So here we can find this way, he also did not hesitate to go to the local market and then getting the whole sack of vegetables, so that understanding the humility of the farmers and all, he would buy all the sacks and he would bring. So this was the way he established his relationship with the locals over there. Then coming with the thematic analysis, we can, I want to acknowledge my co-author for thematic analysis or theoretical framework. So he was the one who constructed. And here I would like to say that, yes, Namdroling is a living map of Tibet where architecture and rituals, it is replicated through Tibetan traditions. And here we must say that, I have forgot to mention over here, but yes, we are talking about the heterotopic space of Foucault, where you can find another space, Tibet is being made in through monasteries, and then which we can map down the Tibet, the loss of Tibet can be mapped in the monasteries. Then with the limitations, I would like to talk where we just lack of secondary sources, because there were no secondary sources as much that we found for Namdroling, and we have to depend a lot on oral narratives from senior monks, and I think we need to do more for the documentation and research for this. So in conclusion, I would like to say that, yes, Namdroling is also regarded as the golden temple of the south, which actually generates a lot of revenue in the south. So for here also we can find the Indo-Tibetan relationship. So to conclude, I would like to say Namdroling Monastery stands today as a living representation of Tibet, embodying its art, architecture, rituals, and resilience. It reminds us that a nation may be erased from the map, but not from the memory. It reminds us that culture is stronger than conquest and faith deeper than frontiers. Popularly known as Golden Temple of the South, Namdroling is not just a place of worship, it is a testament of survival, a map of longing, and a sanctuary of hope. As researchers, our role is to document, preserve, and celebrate these living cartographies so that the story of Tibet continues not as a tale of loss, but as one of the transformation and continuity. And just to end, because already my co-author, he has written few over here, so I'll be reading from there to conclude. So monastery is a mimicry built and rebuilt, the geopolitical imagination itself, as an imagined entity and a potent in itself, because this directly reacts to the cartographies, to the fixities of actual geopolitics of Tibet, which is a creator and a signifier. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Rajeev, who teaches, who is an assistant professor of political science at University in Sikkim, and his paper title is Modern State Formation of Sikkim and Tibet, a comparative study of British Raj and Chinese.
Good afternoon, Dashi Dile, to everyone. Thank you, Professor Gohain. I am Rajeev Rai from ICFA University Sikkim, Department of Political Science. I'm here with my co-author, Dr. Reena Rai from Kanchenjunga State University. And so this is my second time here, and I would like to thank the organizers for having me here. So in this study, what we have tried to do is, we are looking at the process of state formation of Sikkim and Tibet. And so my argument would be the modernization. So colonialism is responsible for the modernization of the states, because if we look at the history of the nation states, so most of the modernizations have taken under colonialism. So we have tried to compare Sikkim under British colonialism of 19th century to the present Chinese occupation of Tibet. So we have tried to draw parallels between these strategies. So So this study juxtaposes British strategy and Chinese occupation of Tibet today, British strategy of 19th century. So I have taken Sikkim as a counterpart because in several aspects, Sikkim and Tibet have similarities. So, and this study asks a question that Chinese rule bears all the fundamental characteristics of colonialism over Tibet. So this study does it through historical comparison of European colonialism of 19th century over Tibet with the ongoing incursion of China over Tibet. This study uses historical, analytical, and comparative method to understand the trajectories of Chinese rule over Tibet vis-a-vis Sikkim under British colonialism. So Sikkim has been chosen as a counterpart to juxtapose British colonialism with Chinese occupation of Tibet. So colonialism played an important role in formulating the structure of the state into a modern society. A qualitative structural transformation that led to the effective change from feudal society into the modern society to subserve their interests. So what Beijing advocates today is, it talks about peaceful liberation and modernization. So somehow modernization is attributed to the colonialism. And that's how China tries to legitimate its control over Tibet. So if we look at the historical overview of state formation of Tibet, so according to Tibetan historiography, origins of first king is attributed to 127 BC, but it was under Songtsen Gampo that Tibet was unified in 7th century. And Tibet expanded its dominion into Chinese territory in 763 AD. So when Tibetan forces seized Tang capital of Chang, modern Jiang, after which Tang court was compelled to render annual tribute to Tibetan authority. So from 1565 until 1642, political authority in Tibet rested with King of Chang. So during the reign of 5th Dalai Lama, so it is marked with a decisive transformation in Tibet, as he assumed the role of both spiritual and temporal leader of a unified Tibet. So during the reign of 5th Dalai Lama, Tibet was consolidated under his power. So Great Fifth, His Holiness Dalai Lama, consolidated the central Tibet, and with the help of Mongols, and he also established a significant relations with Manchu rulers, thereby situating Tibet within wider regional networks of power. So after the consolidation of central Tibet by 5th Dalai Lama and the establishment of Gelugpa state in Tibet in 1642, so around the same time there was a creation of Namgyal dynasty in Sikkim also in 1642. So that is the direct result of the consolidation of power by the 5th Dalai Lama in Tibet. So Sikkim was created as a Nyingma state. So during the reign of 5th Dalai Lama, there was a tussle between the two sects in Tibet. And after the consolidation of power by the Dalai Lama, the rival sect, they fled Tibet and they came to Sikkim and they established a Nyingma state in Sikkim, which was Namgyal dynasty. So the creation of Sikkim as a Nyingma state is the direct result of the consolidation of power in central Tibet by 5th Dalai Lama. So after the creation of, or after the establishment of Namgyal dynasty, so Namgyal dynasty was established by unifying the state-like structures in a single authority. So after that, an early core state was formed with the establishment of Namgyal dynasty, with the unification of various state-like structures into a single authority. So Sikkimese state, according to Mullard, emerged out of a network of many small, multi-ethnic, independent or semi-independent proto-states. So next phase was characterized by the administrative and organizational structure to secure a constant flow of revenue for political, for governance, and to raise armies to protect the power of Sogyal, Phuntsok, Namgyal. So after this happened, so Sikkim was created under a Tibetan model of hierarchy. So after the advent of British, and when Sikkim came into contact with British, so the state formation of Sikkim was highly influenced by the British influence. And in that period, Sikkim started to turn to a modern state. That was the objective of the British colonialism. So why they did that, I will be discussing in the course of my discussion. So by 1889, British authority in Sikkim had reached its peak, its zenith, with the establishment of political office, which institutionalized colonial influence in the kingdom. So British had established a relation with Sikkim in 1817 only with the Treaty of Titalia, but in 1861 with the Treaty of Tumlong had established influential position in Sikkim. And British were allowed to cross over Sikkim, and they were allowed to build roads there in Sikkim. So, but by 1889, this influence expanded to a much higher level, culminating in comprehensive control over the kingdom's foreign affairs and internal administration. So from 1889 until the end of colonial rule in India, British policies in administration, land management, and education vividly reflected the profound impact of colonialism on Sikkim. So while that was happening in Sikkim, so in Tibet, so by fearing the British influence in Tibet, so Manchu rulers, they tried to invade and they tried to depose Dalai Lama. So in 1908, Manchu forces invaded Tibet, and that was the turning point in the relationship between Tibet and Manchu Empire. So when Manchu court sought to depose the Dalai Lama, he responded by formally declaring the termination of traditional Choin relationship. This is priest-patron relationship which was established during the reign of Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan. So Tibet and Manchu rulers along with the Mongols were having this priest-patron relationship. So that was dominated by Dalai Lama, therefore redefining Tibet's political and religious stance vis-a-vis the imperial authority. But the control of Manchu Empire, it lasted for a very short period of time. So in 1911, so Manchu dynasty was toppled by the nationalists in China. So it led to the expulsion of imperial troops from Tibetan authority. So when His Holiness 13th Dalai Lama returned to Tibet, he declared the independence of Tibet and proclaimed that, and he unilaterally affirmed his supreme authority over Tibet. So between 1913 and 1951, Tibet exercised de facto control over its internal and external affairs, undisturbed by any foreign powers, persistently seeking recognition and validation of its autonomy. So after the emergence of communist China, so there is geopolitical and security issues concerning Chinese occupation of Tibet. The instruments employed by China in Tibet can be understood as mechanisms of colonial control. So strategically for China, Tibet was regarded as a vital backdoor. Strategically, Tibet was very important for China. So Tibetologist Professor Dawa Norbu observes China began to perceive Tibet as a backdoor to China as the lips of the mouth. So from this perspective, the occupation or influence of a foreign power over Tibet was perceived as a direct threat to China's security, and it triggered China to go ahead with the invasion of Tibet. So because of geostrategic position of Tibet, so China sent its Red Army to Tibet. So from the outset, Chinese developmental policies in Tibet have been guided less by the needs and aspirations of Tibetan people than by the strategic and geopolitical imperatives of consolidating control over a newly seized territory and exploiting its abundant natural resources. So this has been the interest of China since the very beginning. So Norway aptly observed that one of the main reasons for the communist takeover of Tibet, as China advocates, is not historical claims or ideological motives, rather it is the strategic interest of China. So here I have done a comparison between the strategy employed by the British during colonialism and the strategies which China is employing today in Tibet. So, and both the powers, so British in Sikkim used education as a strategy to co-opt. But when we look at the Chinese strategy, it is coercive in nature. When we compare the mechanism that the British used during colonialism and the mechanism which China is using right now, it is far more devastating. British used persuasion, and British used force only when it was needed. But today, China is exercising unrestrained power in Tibet. And it's kind of China is committing a kind of atrocity in Tibet today. So, Sikkimists began to receive Western-style education from 1870s, following the Christian missionaries, and colonial power used missionaries to carry out the colonial project. Christian missionaries in Kalimpong actively encouraged them to enroll Sikkimis, the sons and daughters of aristocratic family, to Western education. So, likewise, in early 1950s, Tibet witnessed the gradual emergence of modern education system. So, in Sikkim, what British did was they prioritized providing English education to the children of elite class. So, by doing that, they wanted to create a section of pro-British aristocrats, and in that objective, they were successful also. So, Beijing education policies in Tibet contributed to the marginalization of Tibetans, undermining their language, culture, and identity. China's education policy functions as an insidious, harmful mechanism of cultural erasure. The enactment of 1995 Law on Education and 2000 Law on the National Standard Spoken and Written Language institutionalized Mandarin as the primary language of instruction, thereby eroding constitutional guarantees of minority linguistic rights. So in 2024 and 25, China's education policy in Tibet has intensified dramatically. So this I'm trying to highlight how colonizers used education to carry out their project, which China is doing in the present context in Tibet. So in Jogye County, so more than 600 young monks were forcibly disrobed and relocated to the state-run schools, where Tibetan has ceased to function as the primary medium of instruction. So the bilingual education which China talks about in reality translates into Chinese-only instruction for core subjects, beginning as early as during the early phase of the study. So at present, nearly 1 million Tibetan children are compelled to attend colonial-style boarding schools, separated from their families, religious traditions, and linguistic heritage, an arrangement that serves as a deliberate instrument of forced assimilation. So China is using education as a strategy for the assimilation of Tibetan culture. So in conclusion, so both European colonial powers and contemporary Chinese leaders employ rhetoric emphasizing benevolent intentions to justify their engagement in foreign regions. So this is the same strategy they are using. So in case of China, the new colonial objective is to shape and cultivate a generation of leaders sympathetic to future Chinese policies. By contrast, European colonialism operated in a time when there was the concept of sovereignty and nation-state system was not institutionalized before the Second World War, when there was no community of nations like United Nations. But even with the presence of all these international communities, so so when the principles of statehood and sovereignty are globally recognized and institutionalized, so China is exercising its unrestrained power in Tibet, because there was no boundary between the Tibet and China. So China is exercising unrestrained power in Tibet, in Tibetan autonomous region, and in the areas where Tibetans are inhabiting. So conditions continue to deteriorate under Chinese rule, with mounting evidence of systematic repression directed against Tibetan culture, religion, language, and identity. So this is all. Thank you.
A very decent set of panelists, finishing very before time. We have much prompting. So we can now take questions. I just give quick comments for each of the people, very quick, and I will not take away time from the questions that will come. So the first paper was very interesting about the Tibetan diaspora.